Tim, welcome back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this is a great opportunity for us to have a conversation about both the Process Enneagram and then eventually about the Strategic Inquiry Enneagram. So from your perspective, you've been working with the Enneagram for about how long, and what was the genesis of this?
The genesis, Steve, of the Enneagram is in the work of Dick Knowles, when he was trying to make sense of changes that were happening and that he was creating as the leader of a DuPont plant in the mid-90s. And that's probably the genesis of the Process Enneagram. The Enneagram that we're using in the book is a modification of that. Mm-hmm. The Strategic Inquiry Enneagram, to help us understand complex situations that aren't as straightforward as we sometimes think they are.
I know we've written about it in the book, but some people learn better by hearing and seeing. Can you give us a quick overview of and walk us through the Enneagram just from a mapping standpoint?
Well, I think, and I know this is not the way Dick says it, but I think of the Enneagram as comprising of 9 different doorways into a room. Mm-hmm. And inside this room, as you stand in each doorway, you get a different perspective. And those 9 dimensions start with what is the current state of the system, its identity as a system. The second dimension of the Enneagram is about relationships and connections. It's about the relationships between people and the connections between functions or departments or groups or entities or programs, mm-hmm. Any entity within a larger system. The third dimension is about how information is shared. All types of information, not just data and facts and figures, but information that involves people's feelings, cultural reactions, subsets and so forth. If you look at the reactions recently in the Ukraine, there's a lot of information that's been going on and being shared around the world. Some of it is about the facts and data of what the events that led to the change of government. A lot of it has been about people's beliefs and feelings. But it's also, along with information, goes this issue of how well is that information, or what impact is that information having on the capacity of people to coalesce shared meaning and turn that into will to act, or will to be inert, or whatever.
And you see how rapidly in today's world, that with happens. Information systems,
that's
that
exactly.
can happen.
Yeah. And again, Kiev was a very good case in point. Mm-hmm. The fourth dimension is our intention. When Dick originally created the Enneagram for use with human systems, he called it vision, but then we changed it to intention. What is it that we are intending to do? I noticed with one of the big 4 accounting firms recently, they're no longer using vision or mission or intention. They're calling it their ambition. What is it that we have an ambition to achieve or to be?
Or to create.
The next dimension are the principles and ground rules that both actually underpin what we do and should underpin what we do. Mm-hmm. And it's the difference between what we say we should be doing or would like to do on the one hand and what we end up doing on the other hand. So the next dimension, the 5th dimension, is the principles and ground rules that are operating in the system. Both the principles that we aspire or hope or think we should be operating by, plus those that we are actually operating by or would be seen to be operating by someone who is observing us, so to speak, from the outside. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing to me is that we've gone through 6 of these dimensions or aspects or doorways of this into this room before we've actually defined what the problem is. It's only when we get to the 6th step in this process do we define the dilemmas, the constraints, the tensions, the issues. But they're usually viewed at that point in time with an enormously greater sense of perspective that's more appropriate to the situation than if you go straight there, which is what often
most people start with.
A lot of people start with, that's correct. The 7th dimension is the strategy, the new context that we need to operate in, the strategy and the approach that we're going to take. And then the detailed work that we're going to do, the specific action steps. And then finally, stepping back from the system and asking ourselves, what have we learned from this whole experience at a much deeper level? And how can we sustain it going forward?
You know, I personally find two areas, all the areas, or doorways as you would call them, particularly useful and important. I'd like you to just say a word or two about them. One is about really how to drill down or understand it in a deeper way, the issue of tension. People often talk about the high-level problems as effects and not get at cause. So if you have a thought or two about that.
I would say that the beauty of the Enneagram as a device for inquiring into complex problems is that at some point you stand back from and look at the whole. And in standing back and looking at the whole, you see very quickly the deeper underlying causes. And they become so, they almost hit you in the face sometimes. When I say you, I'm talking about the group that's in the conversation about whatever the issue is. It's when the whole system is reflected back to them that you can sometimes see people have a physical reaction of recognition. They see the underlying issues for what they are at a whole of system level.
And that really leads me, I appreciate you saying that, because it leads me to my second area that I wanted you to say a word to. And you might have addressed it, but you might have a word or two more about it. And that is stepping back and looking at the whole. I think one of the unique things that you've brought to the Enneagram is that second pass conversation, which in some ways takes place at the deep learning point, is one, looking at that whole conversation from that vantage point of having reviewed all of those prior steps and looking at it once again. I think that's been profound. Can you say a word or two about that?
In my experience, unfortunately, it's often rushed. Perhaps too often, too quickly, too many times, and I'm as guilty as any. But when a group really takes the time to reflect, so what is this discussion, what is this conversation telling us about the system we're all in? Or if we were outside consultants and we knew now all of this information about the system we're part of, what would we be thinking about the underlying cause or the deeper insights that pervade this? At that point, the conversation can be extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree.